Yeah, it's interesting because it happens pretty often. I was actually just working with a client recently where they had someone that they kind of put on this development plan and a roadmap for promotion, and they thought they were doing everything right. And then all of a sudden she resigns and, it kind of hit them, blindsided them to an extent. But then once you actually talk to the employee, you end up finding out, there's some real issues there that maybe they really weren't talking about.
So, what are some of the steps leaders can take tomorrow to create a foundation of a culture where, when you talk with the employees, they're talking about things, they're getting their needs met? So, what is that first step?
I think the first step, and this is one area where a lot of really businesses of any size kind of drop the ball in, is, I'll go into a business to start the evaluation process. And when we're talking about culture, I'll oftentimes ask these key stakeholders, business owners, how would you rate it? And everybody tends to, give me the first answer is just, it's great. Our culture is amazing, which is a good first step, but everybody says that. Once you start peeling back the onion a little bit and kind of going in underneath the rug, you start talking to employees. Sometimes they paint a slightly different picture, right? So with that being said, I think the first step is always going to be to build some kind of foundation for measurement for some of that feedback so that we can start looking, okay, let's poll our audience, so to speak, right? Let's poll all the employees. Let's find out what's working now, what isn't, what are areas for improvement. How do people really feel about our culture? And let's actually put some data behind it. Let's measure some of these feelings. And then let's see how we can improve over time, right? We might take an initial assessment and say, okay, our employees are really unhappy with maybe how our compensation decisions are being made, or maybe they feel like performance reviews aren't being done fairly, or whatever the topic is, or whatever the theme is. And then we might say, okay, let's lay out a roadmap so that we can tackle this one area for the next 6 months. And let's poll the audience again, right? Take another engagement survey 6 months down the road, and let's compare it to that original baseline and figure out, okay, have we improved? And if so, then great. What are some other areas that we might work on and improve on in the future, right? So I think it all starts with getting the measurements down and then having a foundation to build on from there. I think that's always the best first step.
Yeah, so having that foundation and knowing our people. And as leaders, often we put out policies, procedures, and we engage with our team members and we think everything's kind of going well. And then there's a surprise. What are ongoing things that we can do to truly understand the needs of our teams?
Yeah, it's interesting because it happens pretty often. I was actually just working with a client recently where they had someone that they kind of put on this development plan and a roadmap for promotion, and they thought they were doing everything right. And then all of a sudden she resigns, and, it kind of hit them, blindsided them to an extent. But then once you actually talk to the employee, you end up finding out, there's some real issues there that maybe they really weren't talking about during the length of the employment. And now they're working backwards to try and fix. So I think it always starts with doing a deep dive, and having those more thought-provoking conversations with the employees. Oftentimes when you're doing, let's say, the one-on-one type of traditional conversations, all too often managers are focused on, the tasks, the given projects of the week. And they don't really talk about, are you happy working here? Do you find it fulfilling? Do you enjoy the work that you do? How can I improve as a manager to support you more? What roadblocks are preventing you from doing the best work that you can? These types of questions are a little bit more deeper, a little bit more thought-provoking, but sometimes they will get to a root cause issue that might prevent that kind of turnover from happening in the first place. So, you got to look at this almost with a fine-tooth comb and do a little bit more of a deeper dive than just kind of the generic one-on-one types of conversations. I think that'll be very helpful, at least.
So we often have a need for a position in our company. We come up with a job description and we say, okay, these are some of the skills that we need. We go out there, we recruit this team member to come on board. How do we develop this onboarding process so that this team member understands the culture and the functions where they feel a sense of belonging, and then they can contribute to the level that we would like them to?
Yeah, the onboarding topic is an interesting discussion because there's so much that can be said about it. But ultimately, I think one of the first questions that I would have for a business is, how do you define your culture, right? Because if you don't have a strong understanding of what your culture is and how you define it and what behaviors you want out of your current employees, then it's difficult to convey that to a new hire, right? Because if you don't, your current existing group doesn't have a thorough understanding of it, then they're going to kind of be giving mixed signals potentially to the new hire. So I think it all starts with really looking at your existing culture, defining it. All too often you'll start with, the basics, like what's your mission? What's your vision of the business? A common one are the core values, right? But even if you look at something like a core value, let's say, as an example, I was working with a business recently that was saying one of their core values is speed is king, right? So they want to move quickly with everything. But at the same time, they also have a kind of a conflicting core value, which is that they want a high quality work output, which, there can be some conflicting messages there, right? Because if you're moving really fast, you may not always have the best quality if you're just trying to get things quickly out the door. But they never really took the time to explore what the underlying behaviors are that drive those core values. And I think once you start exploring, okay, well, which is it? And sometimes it may vary from one department to the other, but actually taking the time to explore, okay, if we're going to say speed is king as a core value, in which circumstances does this apply? And what does it mean? Is 4 hours a suitable response time? Is it 8 hours? Is it 24 hours, right? Depending on what the task is. But you got to examine all those underlying behaviors, because that's how you can actually put some SLAs around it, right? Some expectations, because then you can convey that to a new hire when they start, so that when they, even going through the interviewing process or the job description, you're able to now outline, hey, speed is king. And this is what we mean by that, right? These are the expectations of your specific job. And then when you're interviewing, you can talk about it. When you're doing the onboarding, you can build on it again and say, okay, this is what we meant. Remember, we talked about this interviewing process, right? These are our core values. This is what these core values mean for you in your specific job. And then this is how it translates to the department and the wider organization. So you can kind of build on it from there. And all too often, that's not done enough, right? Sometimes a company will say, okay, the founder will decide these are our 4 to 5 core values. We'll post them on a wall, and then nobody ever talks about it ever again, right? And then you ask a company, hey, what are your core values? And you might have 4 or 5 hands going up, hey, it's this and this, but it's not consistent messaging, right? So I think that's really how it kind of builds on itself, right? One step at a time. And just being more thoughtful about the entire sequence of events to make sure that the onboarding process in this case is as productive and as efficient as possible towards getting somebody to start and engaging the right behaviors from the get-go.
This is beautiful, and this is a great path for understanding what the culture looks like. Imagine, many times than not, we don't even know the culture that we want. Start a company is doing well. We get busy into running the company and growing and just managing day to day. Now we decide that the culture is sometimes now turned, which is toxic in nature. Maybe employees are not happy and performance challenges are taking place. What is that first step right here? Where do you take the brakes on and pull the lever and say, we want to change the tracks? What is that step while continuing to operate your business?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think once you have that foundation of what are the behaviors that you want, then you can start examining, okay, when you're looking at the workforce, whether it's 20 employees or 150, whatever it is, you start figuring out who are the role models for those behaviors, right? And how does everybody else measure up against whatever these new standards are? Whenever you identify that you do have employees that maybe have become toxic over the years, then it depends on the circumstances, but you have all sorts of different options, right? You can engage in just honest dialogue with the employees sometimes and just say, hey, listen, I know we haven't been the most clear and the most passionate about our core values, but this is our direction moving forward. This is what they are. These are the behaviors, et cetera. You can outline the whole thing. This is how we want you to behave. And we've noticed your behaviors over the last couple of years, the last couple of months, whatever, just aren't quite in alignment with that. But we want to give you an opportunity to improve, right? Because we value you, and you can kind of have that whole discussion and giving the person an opportunity to change their behaviors, right? To now match what the business wants. I've done a lot of those conversations, and sometimes people will align with whatever the expectations are, right? Because they value their jobs and they want to be successful there. And other times people are going to be resistant, so much so that you may have to make a hard decision and let that person go, right? And you can find all sorts of ways of being supportive for that individual, especially somebody that's been with you for a long time, to give them a soft landing wherever it is that they're going, giving them time to transition, maybe a severance package, whatever it is. But as a business, if you identify this person has become toxic, let's say, and is detrimental to the overall team, then you want to do what's best for the overall business, right? And if sometimes that means you have to make a hard decision and let somebody go, then for the good of the group, then maybe that's the right decision to make. Depends on the circumstances, of course. But I think you also want to be honest as a business. And if you haven't kind of really outlined what the expectations are from the get-go and giving people an opportunity to improve and giving people the right feedback about what the expectations are, then you might want to start there first, right? Make sure that that's done well before you push people out the door, because you want to be, respectful of people. Obviously, it's people's livelihoods we're talking about. So you want to make sure that people have an opportunity to meet whatever the expectations are for the business.